Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're all having a lovely, lovely day. It's very grey in London where I am at the minute, so I hope you didn't. I got rained on massively when I came here, so all dry now though, so that's good. So thank you so much for coming today. We are going to be talking through how to write the perfect essay, and today specifically, it is for GCSE English. So a little bit about me. My name is Sarah. I am originally from Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland. However, I now live in London, as I say. I moved to Glasgow in 2017 to do my undergraduate degree in English literature and theatre studies. But for the first 2 years of my degree, I also studied Scottish literature. So you can tell I'm a massive book fan, absolutely love it. And then during the pandemic, I was about a year away from graduating, and like everyone, I was thinking, what am I going to be doing after I finish? And again, like lots of people during the pandemic, I was watching a lot of TV, and I thought, that's what I want to do after I leave my undergraduate degree. So then I applied to drama school and very luckily got in first time round. And I then moved to London to study an MA in acting at East 15 Acting School, where I graduated in 2021. And I just haven't left London ever since. So yeah, I've been working and living in London for the last 3 years as an actor. But I also love talking about books and about English because that was kind of my first love. So I'm really glad that you've all come and joined me today to talk about writing essays. Another little thing about me, as I've mentioned already, massive book nerd, and I love walking and knitting, and I always have cup of tea with me. So that's me in a nutshell. So today's lecture is going to be split into two halves. The first half, we're going to be looking at what an English essay should always include, coming back to the question, planning, and then going on to what it actually takes to write the essay. So we're going to look at writing your introductions, your main paragraphs, coming to conclusions, and then we're going to kind of sum up with some general tips for writing. And then in the second half, the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to have a Q&A. So please, if you have any questions during the seminar, if you have any, if you want me to expand on any points that I've made, please just drop them down below and then we'll get to them at the very end. And please remember to upvote everyone else's questions, keep a track on what everyone else is asking so that we can make sure that we cover everything. And we are really glad to be helping you today. If you haven't heard of us before, Snap Revise is kind of there to help improve access to quality educational resources for students. So we do this by providing free resources, including our very popular cheat sheets and revision notes and content summaries. So we'll be adding hundreds and hundreds more free resources to our website, including this very seminar. So if you want to listen to me talking about an English essay again, or you think you might have missed something and you want to go over it, then the seminar recording and the slides that I'm using will be made available to you for free. And we'll email you the link for this within the next few days. So we also have terrific printed resources, which you can purchase from our online shop. So our summary sheets, which I have with me, they condense the entire subject into a handful of pages. As you can see, lots and lots of information there. We also have text guides. So this is very relevant for English. As you could see, this one is about Macbeth, goes into incredible detail, and it also helps, it puts a lot of the information in like a digestible way for you to then think about how you can take all of this information and analyze it in an essay. So they're really, really important and great for your analysis. We also have a lot of revision cards. They cover every single spec point, and these are really, really popular. And you can also have access to everything here digitally through Snap Revise Plus. And as a thank you for coming along, for giving up an hour or so of your half-term break and attending today, we have a 20% discount available to you. So just use this code CM20. You can scan the QR code and we will post the link and the code to our shop in the Zoom chat. Just please be aware that this offer ends, as you can see, at 11:59 on Sunday, the 23rd of February. So with all of that said, let us crack on with the seminar. So first of all, we're going to talk about what an English essay should always include. Everything that I'm going to cover is the basis of an English essay. So first of all, we're going to talk about textual analysis. You might think that it's very self-explanatory because you're doing an English essay, but it really is the crux of every single essay that you write. Everything comes back to your analysis. So you should be analysing poetic and literary techniques such as imagery, punctuation, alliteration, word choice, all of the lovely keywords that we love to see and hear in an English essay. Never throw in a quote just for the sake of it. You're not being marked on your ability to regurgitate and remember quotations from, page whatever of a play. You are being marked on how you interpret said quote. And anytime you quote, whether it is as simple as word choice or the use of color, always analyze it and evaluate it. So themes as well are something that is crucial to an English essay, because any piece of literature, whether it's a poem or a play or a short story, it's always inherently full of themes. And most of the time in an exam, a theme will be mentioned within the question, so you'll be given a kind of pointer of what you should be looking at thematically, but always link your argument back to any theme that your chosen text is involved with. So thinking about when you're using a quote, how does this quote explore the theme that you've been given or that you've chosen, and why is that so important? Having a clear structure as well is vital. We're going to go into this in a bit more detail, but ultimately you want to be understood when you're writing an essay, and you want your examiner to have the easiest time being able to read and understand what you've written. So we don't want wishy-washy arguments or confusing paragraphs where you've started saying one thing in one sentence and then after the full stop you've moved on to something else, because that will just be confusing to read. A coherent, clear, structured essay will do you wonders, and it will always help your mark. So for anyone who's a bit more mathematically minded, which is not me, but even I find this quite helpful, you could think about your essay in terms of fractions. So your introduction would be 1/10 of your essay, your conclusion would be 1/10, and then in the middle, the main kind of filling, if you want to think of it as like a sandwich, your main filling of your essay would be 8/10, which is the body of paragraphs. And also within your entire essay, relating your text to its socio-historical context. So what I mean by socio-historical context is anything relating to social and historical factors or involving like social history. So most of the time, a text cannot be separated from the period in which it was written. If you think about it in terms of, for example, like Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre would be very different had it been written in America in the 1950s as opposed to England in the 1830s. So always be thinking about the socio-historical context in terms of how important, say, like religion was at the time, or whether there were specific laws that your text might be in conflict with or in dialogue with, what the political stability was like at the time, and what the gender roles were like, or societal expectations, or the kind of thoughts about morality. It all links back to how the author then chooses to tell their story. And it's something that examiners in specifically are looking for. So this is one of the points in your marking criteria, which we will also talk about later on. But you are being asked specifically to show understanding of the relationships between the texts and the context in which they were written. So these are always points that you should be going back to in an English essay. If you're doing any practice essays at home, or if you're just planning ahead towards your exams, always ask yourself, have I analysed the text? Have I analysed the themes? is my structure clear, and have I related it back to the historical and social context? So next we're going to move on and we're going to talk about coming back to the question. So whether it's in an exam or a piece of coursework, whether it's at school or whether you go on to further education, the question that you have been set or that you choose is always your first port of call. So to understand the question, you should deconstruct it. So ask yourself, what is the question asking you to do? Is it asking you to look at a specific thing? Is it asking you or telling you, are there any specific instructions that you are being guided to look at? And what are the key words within that question? So, for example, this is a question from a past paper for GCSE. Starting within this extract, explore how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in A Christmas Carol. Write about how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in this extract and how Dickens presents the suffering of the poor in the novel as a whole. And then why not throw in a bit of Michael Caine, because we all love Michael Caine, or at least I do. So I've highlighted what I think the keywords are, what the indications are that you should be looking at. So started out with how. How Dickens presents the suffering of the poor is important because it's asking you, what does Dickens do? What techniques does he use? So you can be thinking about imagery, poetic techniques, literary techniques, whether there are specific word choices, whether there are any metaphors, and what effect does this have on you as the reader? And then again, linking all of this back, and how does this support the argument that you're going to make? I also highlighted the suffering of the poor because that guides you to a very specific group of people in a very specific circumstance. But it also creates a kind of sense of opposition. So obviously, if you're categorizing some people within that umbrella of the poor, that then will lead you to think, okay, well, if they're the poor, there will be other people who are the rich. So how do you show that opposition? Are there any quotes that you know of that you could talk about later that support that argument, and you can really evidence that? And then finally, I've highlighted the fact that the question states in this extract and in the novel as a whole. So it's asking you to be comparative, to show the differences, or to show how something that is referenced or presented in one section of the text is coherent throughout the whole novel. So you know that you have to talk about both things. So then after you have thought about your question, you will then move on to planning to write your essay. So this always helped me, whether it was a coursework essay or in an exam. And honestly, you can write the simplest plan ever. I'm gonna show you an example of a plan that literally took me 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes can be key and can really help you in any situation where you're writing the essay. So I would always suggest breaking it down into what paragraphs you are going to do so that you always have that to refer to as well. Sometimes you can get lost in writing or analyzing, and being able to look back at a specific bit of your paper and go, okay, right, yes, I'm following this plan. But I also want to touch on the fact that you should always be thinking about your line of argument when you're planning. So I don't know whether you might be referring to it as a line of argument or as a thesis statement, but it's the same thing. And it is a golden thread which connects everything that you say all the way from your introduction down to your conclusion. So I would highly recommend that you don't start writing an essay until you have your line of argument, because otherwise you could end up changing the stance that you take, or you might just get a bit lost again in your analysis. So it's really fundamental that you follow your line of argument all the way through, and that you can back it up with as much evidence as possible to make your argument valid. You can take any stance that you want in an essay. Just because someone sat next to you is writing the same essay, but they're taking a different argument, that doesn't matter. As long as you support your argument with evidence and you analyze it and you make your stance and use the rhetoric of an essay, your argument is valid. So this is the example of the plan that I told you took about 5 minutes to make. And as you can see, we have the golden thread going all the way through. So using that Dickens question about the suffering of the poor, the line of argument that I created was, I will argue that Dickens' extensive depiction of the suffering of the poor encourages sympathy from the reader in an attempt to confront them with the inequities of Victorian society. So you can see I make a very clear stance and I start to talk about what I'm going to cover and why that is important. I'm going to be talking about how the reader is sympathetic, and I'm going to be talking about the inequities of Victorian society. And then, because your question very helpfully, and a lot of your questions do this within GCSE, because they literally give you the bullet points of where in the novel and what they want you to talk about, I've decided to split my main body into two paragraphs, one which will focus on the extract and one which will focus on the rest of the text. And then, knowing that that was going to be my structure, I would then think, okay, what quotes do I want to pick out from the extract? And I would maybe highlight those. And then I would maybe just write in the corner of my page the quotes that I think I'm going to use within the rest of the book so that I have that down. I know that that's always something that I thought about when I was taking exams was, okay, I've memorized all of these quotes. And then you start to think about the question and you're like, but I'm going to forget my quote. So sometimes even writing down your quotes, first of all, can be helpful too. But as you see, very simple plan, but completely integral to how you then go about writing your essay. And then you move on and you do what it says on the tin. You start to introduce the shape of your argument. So you're going to signpost that, you're going to highlight what the major debates are that lie behind the question or the topic that you've picked. You're going to signpost your central argument, discuss any core themes, and you're going to answer the question. Again, it's something that you can forget when you're kind of caught up in the, especially in an exam setting, when you can sometimes be caught up in wanting to make sure that you get everything done. You can sometimes forget about actually answering the question that you have chosen. So for me, there's an easy format to remember. This is a format that I used throughout my time at school and at university, which is, it's kind of if you wanted to think about it in form of a word, but I call it TSST. So the first T stands for topic. So it's a sentence or two about the general topic and the essay's main elements and significance. So for example, a sentence might look like texts that or which explore, and then link it back to the question, allow for the audience to reflect upon or better understand, and link back to the question. Very simple, does not need to take a massive amount of time. It just clearly says, this is what I'm talking about. Then the first S means scope. So again, this is a sentence or two which signals what focused element of the larger topic the essay will examine and highlights the major debates. Moving on then to the structure, which is the third S, that gives you clues basically about what to expect within the essay. So it can break down what your paragraphs are about. So it could be potentially the themes that you're going to explore, or what characters you're going to be analysing, or it could, for example, be the before or after of an event. And then finally, final T is your thesis. So again, it's your thesis statement or your line of argument. So we're going to have a look at a few examples. First example being one of my essays from my fourth year at university. So don't worry if it seems overly complicated or long, but it will just give you a good visual representation of that structure within use. So the question that I was answering was the essay that I was writing was an exploration into how the self is concealed in the works of Oscar Wilde. So I write, each of us has heaven and hell in him. This statement from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, hereinafter referred to as Dorian Gray, encapsulates one of the major anxieties of his time: understanding humanity. The 19th century saw the emergence of new philosophies and sciences which threatened the sensibilities and beliefs of its society. Darwinism and Freudianism as examples which undermined belief in religion and binaries of good and evil. Through investigations into the origins of mankind and the inner workings of man, Victorian literature became a device through which writers could explore the limits of the human condition. Such is the case with Oscar Wilde's aforementioned text, as well as an earlier work, Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, hereinafter referred to as Arthur Savile, in both cases exploring how an individual may hide their true self. In this essay, I will argue that through Wilde's presentation of his title characters and their actions, how and why the self is concealed can be analysed, allowing for a deepened understanding of both the morality and anxiety of Victorian society. So, bleh, lots and lots of words. But as I've said already, your introduction does not need to be as complex as this. Obviously, this was a university level essay, but you can see how I start with my topic sentence where I introduce what I'm talking about. I then expand upon it. I make references to the socio-historical context. We love that word. I'm going to be saying that a lot today. Talking about the major debates at the time. I then link it back to the text that I'm going to be writing about. So you can see I'm going to be hereinafter referred to, gives you a pretty good idea that I'm going to be talking about this a lot, Dorian Gray and Arthur Savile. And then I finally link my, or I conclude my introduction with my thesis statement. So it's very clear to see I'm going to be arguing that through Wilde's presentation of his title characters, how and why the self is concealed can be analysed, allowing for a deepened understanding of both the morality and anxieties of Victorian society. So that is one example of an essay, not an essay, sorry, an introduction. I'm going to show you another one. So obviously this has a completely different question. And then my introduction would be, in many ways, the comparison between Bathsheba Everdeen and Constance Chatterley is an easy one. They are both women who push the social boundaries of their society. Discarding the laws under which they live, these heroines are presented as striving for their own independence and resist falling into the stereotypical role of women of their time. Through the relationships in the novel, Lawrence and Hardy expose readers to the themes of equality, both sexually and socially, effectively conveying their beliefs. So I was reading this and it kind of made me do this. And it's because you can see that there is a clear topic sentence and there is some attempt to present what the essay will write about. But the author has made quite bold statements without actually backing them up. The last sentence in particular really confuses me because it talks about effectively conveying their beliefs. We don't know who they are. They could be the writer, they could be the reader, they could be you, the writer of the essay. And it's a good point to bring up actually, because you can never know what the writer or author of your chosen text meant. You can guess and you can suggest an argument, and as long as you have the evidence and analysis to back up that argument, then you can make that up, but you can never definitively say, for example, D.H. Lawrence meant this. So this was actually the introduction to my advanced higher dissertation, and when I read this back, I could not believe that I wrote this. But it should hopefully show you the difference between this introduction and the introduction that I showed you earlier, and how following the TSST structure can really help, because it sets everything up, tells your marker what you're going to be writing about, and then you can just jump straight into the essay, being as clear and concise as possible. So finally, we're going to get onto the meaty structure of your essay, your main paragraphs. As I've mentioned before, this is the real crux, because this is where you're going to be doing all of your analysis. You're going to be presenting your texts, elaborating on them, choosing the quotes and analysing them, explaining why this is important, and then linking it back to your argument. So a structure that I would always use within essays would be, again, we love a topic sentence. Always start your paragraphs with a topic sentence, then elaborate upon that. Then you should be using your evidence or any quotations. Then you provide your analysis for said quotation. And finally, you link it back to your thesis statement or your line of argument. And if you have more than one piece of evidence to back up your point, then you can repeat this structure multiple times. I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit. The one thing I would suggest as well within the main bit of your essay, and it's something that everybody can be guilty of, myself included, is avoiding retelling the story. You can get really wrapped up in analysing and making an argument that you lose sight of the question, but also you can just go on a roll with explaining, okay, so then this happens in the novel, and then after this, this happens, and then after that, this happens, without actually, you can be 4 or 5 sentences later and not have actually supported it with any evidence and any quotes and any analysis. So always try to remember, okay, I'm answering a question, I need to be linking this back, and I need to be analyzing. 9 times out of 10, your marker will be familiar with the text as well, so they don't need you to go into more detail about the content of your text. So just remember this TEEAL, or TEAL, topic, elaborate, evidence, analysis, and then link. So we're going to go over a few examples. So the first example, we're going to use the Dickens question that I have already written my plan for. So I wrote with, again, this probably took me about 8 to 10 minutes. So I chose to focus on the extract that I saw on the paper, and I decided to write about the allegory of a young girl and boy who represent ignorance and want. So my topic sentence says that that is what I'm going to be talking about. And then I elaborate by saying, through this allegory, Dickens confronts his reader with the realities of poverty within his society and how it affects those suffering. So I've elaborated on my topic sentence. I then provide a quotation saying that Dickens depicts the children as animals, stating that they are wolfish, and wolfish is my quotation. I then go on to analyze that in further detail, saying that the image of the wolf conjures associations with primal, wild, and aggressive behavior, thereby taking away the humanity of the children. So again, that I've critically analyzed the quote that I have used, and I go on to then explain why that's important, because it takes away the humanity of the children by comparing them to a wild primal animal. I then go on to say this demonstrates the impact that poverty may have on individuals, robbing them of sensibilities associated with the moral purity so valued by Victorian society, thereby effectively evoking sympathy from the reader. So I have then linked back to my initial line of argument where I talked about the fact that Dickens was conveying the suffering of the poor in order to elicit sympathy from the reader and expose the inequities of his own society. So again, you can see it's a really clear, simple structure, and most of the time it doesn't take more than 1 or 2 sentences to be able to make something cohesive that is an argument in and of itself. We're going to move on to another example. This time, again, it's from GCSE past paper, but it's an extract from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where it details the murder of Frankenstein's wife, Elizabeth. And the question is, starting with the extract, explore how Shelley presents grief and loss. So again, I chose to start with the extract. So I present my topic sentence. Within the given extract, Shelley uses repetition to emphasize the extent of Frankenstein's grief. So the marker knows, okay, we're going to be talking about repetition. We're going to be analyzing a specific poetic or literary technique. I then elaborate on that, saying, using language evocative of love and affection, Frankenstein talks about seeing the body of Elizabeth, saying, so again, I've elaborated on my point and I have almost kind of signposted to the marker where in the text I'm talking about. I then quote, my love, my wife, so lately living, so dear, so worthy. I then go on to analyze it, saying the repetition of my highlights the inextricable link between the two, whilst so demonstrates the admiration he had for her qualities. It's a very basic analysis, but it does the job. And then moving on, again, linking everything back to my argument by saying that by drawing attention to Frankenstein's affection and adoration for Elizabeth, Shelley deepens the reader's understanding of his feelings for her, thereby evoking sympathy as he mourns his beloved wife and presenting the overwhelming nature of grief. So again, you can kind of understand, again, I haven't written a line of argument for this essay, but you can see how my line of argument will probably be to do with what Shelley's presentation of grief and loss does to the reader, and what it does to give the reader a deeper understanding of those themes. We're going to have a look at one final example. This is, again, going back to my essay from uni about Dorian Gray and Arthur Savile. So this is going to show you how you can repeat the same structure within the same paragraph. Sometimes you can read an essay and there's lots of little paragraphs that you think, okay, that could possibly just be merged into one. This is a very long paragraph, so I'm not going to read it all out to you. You can all breathe a sigh of relief. And so can my throat. But as you can see, I have highlighted in red, I have two topic sentences which do link to each other, because my first one says, as he expands from Arthur Savile to Dorian Gray, so too do Wilde's paradoxes expand. And then if you look down to the red highlight again, you can see how I say paradoxically. So you can see that there is a link between the two topic sentences. It's just all going to come in one. So in the first half of the paragraph, I have elaborated on my topic sentence. I then quote, and I detail again where in the text I am analysing. I then elaborate on that. I quote again and elaborate on said quote, and this is where I then bring in another topic sentence, and I'm basically just furthering my argument and showing that I have an understanding of how everything in the text relates to each other. It's also a really good point to be making, and something that you can show your marker, is that you understand how the themes that you're looking at, or how the argument that you're making, can be made from everything within the text. So you don't need to be doing anything as long-winded as this. Again, as I said, it's a university essay, but I hope that you can see that whilst I have my topic sentences, elaborate, quote, and analyze, at the end of this paragraph, I'm always linking everything that I've said back to the statement, my line of argument at the beginning, saying, through both of his title characters, Wilde communicates that the reason the true self must be concealed is due to its dangerous potential to overturn the conventions of Victorian society and jeopardize the understood binaries of good and evil. This allows modern readers an insight into the strict morals of Wilde's time, and to understand the way in which this literature can be utilized the way in which this literature utilized contemporary philosophies and changed ideologies. So again, a really important point. You should always be linking any argument that you make back to your original question. Never leave anything unexplained or unexplored, is the point that I'm trying to make. So once you have worked your way through your main paragraphs, you've got it all, you are nearly there, and you're going to do what it says on the tin. You are going to conclude. So think of this almost as like your mic drop moment. This is where you take your time to make the reader sit back and go, okay, wow, yeah, they made a really good argument. And it might sound silly, but again, it's a point that I've made before. You need to be answering the question by reassessing your line of argument based on everything that you've presented, and drawing a conclusion based on your discussion of the topic. So I always like to think of it as well as your conclusion should be mirroring your introduction. Using similar language as well within your introduction and conclusion is really helpful, because it makes the reader or the marker remember that this is something that you set out at the very beginning of your essay. And if you have used the structures that we've just been looking at for your main body or paragraphs, then writing your conclusion should be really easy and should be a breeze. One thing to note is that your conclusion should never be placed to introduce any new information. Sometimes if you're in an exam and you get to your conclusion, and then you suddenly have, oh my goodness, a light bulb moment where you're like, oh, this would be really, really good. You can always go back and add it to your main body of paragraphs if you have time. If you don't have time, don't bother trying to squeeze it into your conclusion, because it then will throw something into the mix that you haven't had the full time to analyze or evaluate in relation to your argument. So if we want to think about it in terms of a structure to remember, think about it as LER, or my housemate was saying this to me last night. Think about it as like King Lear, so LE and R. So you should always be linking it back to your line of argument. You then evaluate, and you literally evaluate what you've written and sum it up in a concise way. And then you reassert the relevance of what your argument has been. The examiners always want to see critical thinking and an awareness of the relevant of context. So I would always add in a little sentence again about socio-historical context within the conclusion, because again, it's something that can't really be extrapolated from text that you've been reading. So if we think about a conclusion, again, with my Oscar Wilde essay, I wrote, to conclude, the works of Oscar Wilde provide an insight into how Victorian literature engaged with and explored contemporary philosophies. Both Arthur Saville's Crime and The Picture of Dorian Gray combine the morality and anxieties of the era to demonstrate the complex nature of the human condition. Through Wilde's presentation of his title characters and their actions, the extent to which one may conceal one's true self from the world is revealed, hiding the sordid and immoral truth which threatened the values of Victorian society. Ultimately, the texts encourage the modern reader to examine the connection between morality and socio-historical context. We love that word, allowing for a deepened understanding of the time period and how literature sometimes challenged its preconceptions. And I still have the annotated version that my marker gave back to me. And I will have a little flex right now and say that she just wrote excellent conclusion. So again, you can see how this structure of linking, evaluating, and then summing up the relevance of your argument, it's super clear. It's only about 4 sentences, this conclusion, but it brings everything together. I've said think about it as your mic drop moment. You can also think about it, if you're a visual learner and you like to think of it this way, as like you're packing a present and then you tie it all together with a nice little bow. So you can be like, here, this is my argument. And as I've said, always just make sure that you're tying it back to the question that you've been given. So we're coming to the end now, but we're just going to finish with a few general tips. I don't know if anybody knows what the show is, but it's one of my favorite shows, How I Met Your Mother, general tips. So I have 3 main ones: having a quote bank, looking at the marking criteria, and asking yourself, have I? So first of all, with some quote banks or mind maps. Now, I can't lie, this is possibly one of the reasons why I became an English student, because I love me a mind map. I used to make elaborate and really beautifully coloured mind maps full of quotations throughout school and uni, because it was what helps me personally to prepare for exams in the best way. If you have another way that you learn, then that suits you more, then that's completely fair. This is just what I found to be the best way for me. The one that you have on screen right now is an old one from university. Sorry that it's cut off. I think I posted it online at one point. But you can see I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet. And in this instance, I have chosen to do this mind map with events rather than with characters. So there's events and scenes from the play, such as the meeting at the party, the balcony scene, the turning point, the denouement, their deaths, Mercutio's Queen Mab speech. And then you can have as many or as little quotations as you fancy. Whatever works for you. Again, this time I did it by event, but you can do it by character, by theme, anything that you can think of, whatever is going to help you remember the quotes. And it's also, when it comes to picking quotes, thinking about ones that could be analysed for multiple questions, so that you don't get stressed about, okay, I have to remember about 50 quotes so that if any question comes up, I can answer it. I promise you that some quotes will be able to be used in multiple circumstances. So being a bit more picky about the quotes that you choose can also be really helpful. As well as this, have a look at your marking criteria, because it gives you an understanding of what it's like on the examiner's side and what they're looking for. And it breaks down the categories for you for marking. So the first one, AO1, is all about your ability to actually write a comprehensive and understandable essay, and to have used textual analysis and quotations. AO2 is all about your ability to analyze said quotations. AO3, as I talked about previously, is all about the socio-historical context, and all about relating the texts back to the context in which they were written. And then AO4 is quite nitpicky, or you might think it's quite nitpicky, but it can be the difference between getting a B and getting an A. It's things like, have I spelt this word correctly? Have I used a semicolon in the right way? Have I used quotation marks? And have I explained things in an intellectual way through critical thinking? And this leads it on very nicely to asking yourself the have I questions. So this is something that I found online, and I think it's really, really great. It might look like a lot of questions to be asking yourself, so you definitely don't need to be doing it, like trying to remember all of these. But for every point in the marking criteria, asking yourselves a few questions based on them is really helpful. So, for example, if I pick a few from each category, like have I included a thesis statement in my introduction? Do all of my paragraphs directly answer the question? Do all of my references directly support my argument? And then for the second one, have I explained my analysis in terms of the writer's overall message? Have I removed any unnecessary naming of word classes? Does my analysis provide evidence for the points in my argument? And AO3, is all of my context linked to ideas and perspectives of the writer's time? Does all of my context provide original insight into my main argument? And then finally, AO4, have I included key terminology and have I reread my essay to check for spelling and grammar mistakes? So it's always good when you're in an exam. Again, this was something that worked for me, trying to leave yourself 5 minutes at the end for what we love, proofreading, because it can be really, really tempting when you're in an exam that you get to the end and you've got 5 minutes left and you think, right, I'm gonna try and squeeze in anything that I can. But as AO4 talks about, proofreading sometimes does make all of the difference. You can get 2/3 of the way through your essay and then see that you spelt there THEIR instead of THERE, or you didn't include any quotation marks. So you just go in and you draw those in. But the little things really, really do matter. So we're going to sum up now. Thank you so much for sticking with me and for listening. And we're going to get onto your questions in a little moment. I hope that you have found this informative. And if I can leave you with 3 things that are kind of overarching from this talk, always make a plan and use these structures, use the TSST structure, use the topic, elaborate, quote, analyze, and link structure, and then use the LE&A structure for your conclusions. Do your research, have a look at the marking criteria. Between now and your exams, I would say my biggest tip would be do practice plans. Just go through the past papers, and you don't have to write a full essay. You can if you want to, but making little plans just gets you in that habit, and it makes it seem a bit less daunting or intimidating when you get into actually writing it in an exam. Get yourself a cup of tea, a biscuit, a coffee, whatever you want, and just make it something that is enjoyable so that it takes away the kind of anxious energy that can sometimes come with an exam setting. And finally, always come back to your argument, linking everything back to your argument. You won't go far wrong. So thank you so much for coming. You're doing great. Do not panic. You have got this. You can really do this. Before we get to the Q&As, just wanted to give you a little reminder about the special discount that we have going on. So you can get 20% off of anything on our online shop until Sunday. Just use the code SEM20. So as I say, we have lots of great resources. We have our textual guides, we have our summary sheets, we have our revision cards, and anything that you think might be able to help you in your exam, we probably have, and it's a great offer. So make sure to use it. Right, now let me go to our Q&A. So can you cover tips for memorizing quotes, especially Shakespeare? I love me some Shakespeare, so yes, I can definitely cover this. So I would say work out what kind of learner you are, what works best for you. Some people are visual learners, in which case I would say making mind maps, making quote banks, written quote banks is your best port of call. If you are an auditory learner, which is what I am, I like to record myself saying the quotes and then I just play them. I could be walking down the street and I could be listening to quotes. As an actor, I often do this to listen to my lines, to learn my lines. So listen to that. Sit at your desk, have a cup of tea. You'll see I love tea. Sit at your desk, have a cup of tea, speak your quotes aloud to yourself. You could speak them to someone else if you have, if you want to do it in a group with friends. If you are something called a kinesthetic learner, you learn by making or by doing. I would say make flashcards, make quote banks, or if you learn by rereading or writing, write all of your quotes out. I used to have pages and pages of pages of quotes that were kind of categorized. I color coded them for Shakespeare as well, because a lot of it is to do with the rhythm, clapping along, the iambic pentameter, de dum, de dum, de dum, de dum, de dum, really helps me because it gets me in that rhythm, and it just makes things a lot easier to remember. And one final thing as well for remembering quotes, I only realized that I did this recently, but it helped with learning lines for a play I was doing. Having a little ball or something to throw between your hands, because something to do with there's probably something very scientific to do with this that I don't understand myself, but something to do with the motion of throwing something back and forth while you're speaking allows your brain to process it a lot more. But yeah, really think about what works for you as a learner, and whether it's listening, speaking, rewriting, as well. There's so much, especially for Shakespeare online. You will definitely be able to find something that works for you. So I hope that that helped you. What are the best techniques to analyze? Do markers care if you only use obvious ones like simile or symbolism? I would say no. Writers, not writers, markers definitely don't care if you only use these. However, it is good. I think it is something that is within the marking criteria that you should show a range of analysis. Sometimes when you're in an exam and you're trying to think about what best to analyze, you can only come up with, say, word choice or similes. But if you're struggling, I would come back to things like structure, because the way that something is written will vary text to text. So whether it's the punctuation that's been used, whether it's a poem, whether it's a short story, thinking about the type of text can help as well. I would always say analyze imagery, analyze color, analyze word choice. But if you're really struggling, then they want to just see that you can analyze and that you can relate your points back to your argument. So whatever form that takes, do what feels comfortable for you, I would suggest. How many quotes should you memorize for each novel? Whoa, that is a big question. I would say per novel, I would say maybe try, as I've said before, try to pick quotes that you can use for multiple questions or that cover multiple things. So it might help to think about it in terms of character. So for an example, if you were, say, choosing a text like Romeo and Juliet, you could say, right, I'm going to have a bank for Juliet's quotes. This Juliet quote talks about the theme of love. This Juliet quote talks about the theme of death. For a novel, I would say really just try and have a broad range of quotes. If you feel like you can remember lots of quotes, then go for it. Ultimately, this is something that I found you will always end up not using as many quotes as you think in the essay, because it's more important to be analyzing. So for a novel specifically, I would maybe say anywhere between 8 to 15, but it really does just depend on you as a learner and what quotes you think will help you in any circumstance with any question. Um, how do I improve my vocabulary? I have one simple answer for you. Reading. Reading is great to improve your vocabulary. On the way here today, I had picked up a book in a charity shop that is an F. Scott Fitzgerald book, who wrote The Great Gatsby, and I learnt a new word, and I cannot think of what that new word was, but I was like, huh, I've never heard that before. So reading is really great. Reading your peers' essays actually can also be really helpful, because in the lead up to exams, if you want to have a look at like how other people approach certain questions or how other people go about structuring their essays, it can be really good. And looking at what words they use can also be a really good insight. But I would really highly suggest vocabulary. Like in my head, going and opening up a thesaurus would not be overly useful, whereas reading as much as you can when you can really help. And listening to podcasts, if you wanted to talk about, this was something I could say actually about the revision for memorizing quotes or learning, sticking on a podcast about a specific text or about a specific writer can be really good, because then you get to hear other people's perceptions or opinions. But like, our world is full of vocabulary, so just being alert and being attention and being receptive to how other people talk and the discourse around it is always a good shout. So I hope that answers that question. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water. So when I read the question, I don't understand what I'm supposed to write about. What should I do? That is a good question. I myself have been in that situation. I would always say, read as many questions as you can. If there's a question that jumps out at you, do that one. If you read the question and you don't understand what you're supposed to write about, deconstruct it in more detail. So, for example, with that question about Dickens, you are given, and you should most of the time be given, a clear signpost of what you're being asked to write about. So deconstruct it, look at, are there any keywords, are there any indicators about what you should be writing? And if you really are struggling, move on to a different question. I can guarantee you will understand at least one question in your exam, probably more, because you're all smart cookies, so do not worry. And these questions aren't meant to trip you up. They're meant to be challenging, because they're meant to ask you to think critically, and they're asking you to push yourself, but they're not meant to trip you up. So there will always be a way to answer a question. And again, something that I would say, if you are struggling sometimes to understand what you're meant to be writing about, look at the past papers, look at the types of questions that you're being asked, look at the way in which they're being asked, and just get used to reading lots of different questions, because again, it will make everything a bit less daunting during the actual exam. When doing past papers, can I just do a plan and then bullet points rather than writing everything out? Yes, completely. Yeah, if you don't want to do a massive essay, you can do a plan and then do a paragraph where you bullet point, and you have a quote and then you just expand on that quote and then link it back. You do not have to write a full thing. Sometimes it can be helpful, but for quick kind of practice before your exams and doing past paper questions, that is definitely that's the way that I would go about it completely. So yeah, very good question. Can I quickly repeat the TSST method? Yes, of course I can. So the first T is topic. So again, it's your topic sentence, kind of outlining what you are going to be talking about in your introduction. The first S is the scope. So going on to talk a bit about or signaling what focused element of that broader topic you're going to be talking about. And highlighting if there's any kind of major debates or anything major within the time period that you think you will then be talking about, pop that in your scope. Structure is kind of an indicator to your marker what the structure of your own essay is going to be about. So for example, in the one that I used, I mentioned that I would be writing about two texts, Dorian Gray and Arthur Saville, and I mentioned what both texts do. And then the final T is your thesis statement or your line of argument. So always start your line of argument, or at least I would say this, with, in this essay, I will argue that. That should always be the last sentence of your introduction, because it clearly signposts to the author, not to the author, to the marker, that this is your argument and this is your thesis statement. So topic sentence, scope, structure, thesis. Hope that helps. Does the plan of writing the main paragraphs apply for poetry essays as well? Absolutely, completely. I would say it goes to any topic, any subject that you ever do. The plan, the topic, elaborate, quote, analysis, link, that should be your, or could be your basis for any essay you ever write, whether it's history essay, whether it's a media essay, an English essay, anything. It will definitely work for poetry because you can have your topic sentence about in said poem, the poet writes about this theme, and then you elaborate on that. You then quote the poem, you then analyze the poetic techniques, and then you link it back to your argument. So definitely you can use that structure for any type of essay, poetry, short story, novel, anything. What is an allegory? Let me see if I can remember. I'm pretty sure I can. An allegory, so for example, Animal Farm, if any of you are familiar with Animal Farm, it's an allegory where basically the author uses one thing to talk about another. So for in Animal Farm, for example, the author uses the animals and the setup of the farm and them overthrowing the farmer to talk about communism. Or for an example, in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is a really good play, would highly recommend reading it or going to see it if you haven't. He uses the Salem witch trials as an allegory to talk about something called McCarthyism, which was present in America in the 50s. And it also goes back to like they were sort of witch hunting people who were deemed to be members of the Communist Party within America's government or America's political statement. So an allegory is when you use one thing to talk about another, and it's a good thing to be analysing in an essay if you see it come up. Could you please re-explain the elaborate part? So yes, so elaborating within a main paragraph, for example, after you've made your topic sentence, it would be a bit funny to go straight from your topic sentence to quoting. So elaborating can literally be like, what did I say? Within the given extract, Dickens presents the suffering of the poor through the allegory of the young boy and girl. Through this allegory, Dickens confronts his reader with the realities of poverty within his society. So you're literally just elaborating, you're expanding upon what your topic sentence is, and you're kind of using it as a link between what your topic is and the quote that you're going to be using. It's just like a nice little link in between to make sure that your essay flows nicely. How to make strong inferences from the extract. So if I would understand using making strong inferences as like your interpretation of the extract, if you've not seen it before, if you're going for the first time, I would say if you can, underlining or circling any words or any sentences which spring out to you, I would say go through and try and identify any poetic or literary techniques so that you know what you can be analysing. And if there is something that you don't understand, then either try and find something else within the text which you think is more accessible to you and therefore to your marker, or have a look at the sentences around it and see if you can infer what the author is meaning. There's always a way, just keep asking why. That's a question that comes up a lot in English, like why has the author said this? Why? What does this mean? Ask yourself these questions. How to elaborate on quotes. So when you're elaborating on quotes, again, it's just through your analysis. So making sure that any quote that you use, you have analysed it fully. So for example, like the author uses the colour red when Blanche is wearing a nightdress in A Streetcar Named Desire to denote her passionate character, thereby showing the reader her difference to her sister Stella, who is always in white, something like that. Just basically just expanding upon any quote that you use will do the trick. Could you link or post the full mind map image? I don't have the full mind map image, I'm afraid. It will be included on the slides, which you will have access to after we've finished. But I'm sorry, I tried to find, and it's so annoying because I know that I have pages and pages of material still at home in Aberdeen, but as I've said, I'm down in London, and sadly I didn't have 7 hours to get on a train and go and pick them up. But yes, the mind map will be within the slides at the end. So if you wanted to look at that a bit more, then that will be there for you. Improving vocab, I think I've touched on that already. Just keep reading, keep listening, be aware to the world around you, and look at critical thought and critical essays, because a lot of time in academia, people try to make themselves sound very intelligent and important, and quite often they succeed because they're using very good words. Good words. That was a great example of how you should be improving your vocabulary. How much context do I need to include per idea, point, paragraph compared to analysis and the writer's intention? So I think ultimately the main thing that you should be doing is analyzing your points. But I would always say include one sentence that links to the context per paragraph. Because it just shows that you have an awareness of how what you're saying and what you've been analyzing relates to the wider significance of the text or of your argument. And that is that's always important. But yeah, the analysis of the quote and being able to show that you're analyzing is definitely the most important point. I'm just going to pick one more question because we are running out of time a little bit. The length of paragraph does not help you get high marks. Obviously, if you can if you can have an argument within one paragraph that covers multiple quotations and multiple things from the novel within that paragraph, then that's good. But the length of your paragraph does not what's the word I'm looking for? Dictate the mark that you get. So I think I'm going to round up there. Sorry, I didn't have a chance to answer all of your questions. As I've said, there are so many resources online. Use the discount code that we've got today. And as I say, do not panic. I know that it can seem very overwhelming, but trust in the knowledge that you have. Get in some practice. You've got time between now and your exams, and just keep breathing, because you do know what you do know what you're doing. Ultimately, you do know what you're doing. And after the exam is done, just let it go. You cannot change anything about it. So yeah, thank you all so much. I hope you have a lovely remainder of your half term, and best of luck with all of your exams. I wish you all the best of luck. And thank you very much for coming. And it was lovely. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.